I'd like to bring this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, meeting number 13. And we're going to be discussing today, according to Standing Order 1082, tasers. And we'd like to welcome to our committee two witnesses from the Canadian Police Research Centre, Mr. Stephen Palmer, the Executive Director, and from Taser International, Mr. Tom Smith, the Chairman. Before we begin, I'd like to ask the media to please excuse themselves from the room. Give them a minute to do that. I would also like to welcome everybody back to the committee. I hope you all had a good break, come back rested, relaxed, and ready to do lots of work. I think we'll have a very interesting study here before us today, and so I look forward to this time together. Just a word to our witnesses. The usual practice at this committee is allow you each an opening statement of approximately 10 minutes, and then we will move to questions and or comments, beginning with the official opposition and moving to the other opposition parties, and then coming over to the government, and then we'll just continue to rotate with our questioning. And questions and answers usually are around 7 minutes in the first round for each one, and then we move to 5-minute questioning rounds later on. If you're ready to go, who would like to go first? On my program here, I have Mr. Palmer listed first. Is that okay if you go first, sir? Okay, anytime you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Steve Palmer, and I've been with the Canadian Police Research Centre for 10 years. I started as director in 1998 and took over the position of executive director in 2004. For 29 years now, CPRC has been providing leadership in the search for real-life solutions to a wide range of threats to the safety and security of communities and the first responders who serve them. CPRC works through a collaborative model that brings together diverse groups from law enforcement, responder, and science and technology communities from across Canada and around the world. We call this a network of technology partner associates, and the success of CPRC depends on these partnerships, which enable us to draw upon the knowledge and expertise of experts from local, provincial, national, and international law enforcement, other government agencies. We also work with a broad spectrum of industry partners, professional associations, universities, research groups, and more. Through these partnerships, CPRC contributes to the development, refinement, and testing of new products, tools, and technologies in real operational settings. The knowledge and results generated from CPRC studies provide the foundation for further advances in policy, procedures, and technology. It is important to note that CPRC itself does not develop policies and procedures. The work it does is intended to provide tools, information, and recommendations to be taken into consideration by the Canadian police community when reviewing or developing training programs, policies, and procedures. It strives to provide a central and objective source of knowledge on issues of interest to the police community and other first responders, including but not limited to conducted energy devices, better known as tasers. Today I would like to take a few minutes to give you an overview of a study that was published in August 2005. I will also provide you with a brief outline of the study we are currently undertaking on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. In August 2004, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, or CACP, requested that we conduct a thorough review of the existing research and data available on tasers and provide a national perspective on the safety and use of these devices. We worked closely with representatives from the Victoria Police Department, who at the same time were also studying tasers on behalf of the British Columbia Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner. We also consulted with our U.S. and U.K. counterparts, who were in the process of studying the use of tasers at the same time. For the purpose of the 2005 study, we reviewed research and data associated with the use of the taser M26 and X26, focusing on 3 areas. First, medical safety. Second, policy considerations surrounding police-conducted energy devices operation, and finally, excited delirium syndrome. A steering committee was appointed to guide our activities and ensure appropriate representation from the community. Membership included medical professionals, police officers, police trainers, policy analysts, and other stakeholder representatives. Close to 100 sources were reviewed and providing a thorough analysis of the existing data on tasers and excited delirium syndrome in Canada. It was concluded that conducted energy devices are effective law enforcement tools with a low risk of harm to the subject when used appropriately. Available research at the time also indicated that there existed no definitive research or evidence linking the use of tasers to death, but that excited delirium was gaining credibility as a main contributor to deaths proximal to taser use. Based on the material reviewed, CPRC formulated the following recommendations for the police community to take into consideration. It became apparent that there is no scientifically tested, independently verified, and globally accepted safety parameters for the use of tasers, meaning that police services are completely reliant on manufacturer claims regarding the safety of the product. CPRC recommended that further work is needed for the national coordination of tasers and other less lethal technologies, issues, and testing. Our review also indicated that more research is needed on the existence and nature of excited delirium and how people suffering from this condition can be best subdued by police to expedite medical treatment. We also concluded that there is a lack of scientific information on death proximal to restraint and recommended that a national epidemiological study of individuals resisting arrest be conducted to gather data on all aspects of these subjects and those dying in police custody. This recommendation is what led to the CACP requesting the restraint study, which was announced in November 2007. Restraint is one of the 3 components of our most recent study of tasers. The other 2 components are to conduct an update of the 2005 report and to look at ways of creating a more centralized approach to evaluating evolving taser technology and encouraging information sharing on tasers. As part of the restraint study, we are reviewing a variety of documents such as police reports, ambulance route sheets, and coroner's reports to identify, evaluate the situational and individual characteristics of persons who resist police interaction and undergo police restraint, as well as look at the incident of subject death and the relationship between varying methods of restraint and the risk of death in the restrained subject. As part of the update of the 2005 report, CPRC is reviewing the expanded body of research which has become available since 2005. Project methodology and structure is similar to that used to produce the 2005 report. The CPRC is working in collaboration with the research community, end users, and other stakeholders, and a working group has been established. Experts from the scientific, medical, and operational communities will again be consulted for their objective analysis. A steering committee will be established to guide activities and assure appropriate representation from the community. Membership will include medical professionals as well as representatives from non-governmental organizations, emergency responder organizations, police oversight bodies, and relevant international organizations. CPRC is also collaborating with experts who have participated in other studies and reviews of tasers nationally and internationally. CPRC is involved in a number of other taser-related initiatives. We are currently waiting for final approval of a joint research project with the United Kingdom Home Office Scientific Development Branch and the United States National Institute of Justice. The aim of the project is to study and evaluate the new extended-range wireless projectile being developed by Taser International to ensure it meets or exceeds the necessary safety standards for use in law enforcement. CPRC is keeping an eye on the Taser Cam issue and is considering conducting an independent study into the use of these devices in Canada. The Taser Cam is a weapons-mounted audio and video recording device that is designed to capture video footage of use of force incidents when Taser is deployed. We are also collaborating with federal, provincial, and municipal agencies to determine the level of interest for a research project which would review the different use of force frameworks. being used by the police services across Canada to move towards one consolidated, nationally accepted use of force framework. Finally, CPRC is currently establishing test-based lines for tasers, and we will begin testing weapons for police services this spring. The work we do in collaboration with our network of technology partner associates generates important data that can assist decision makers in developing relevant policy, procedures, or training programs. Building on 29 years of experience, CPRC will continue to build partnerships, draw upon the rich knowledge and expertise found here and abroad to support the law enforcement and responder community in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll now go over to our next witness, Mr. Smith, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you for the invitation to be with you today. My name is Tom Smith. I'm the founder and chairman of the board of TASER International. One of my chief duties is to travel to meetings such as this, where we offer information on a scientific and technical nature to stakeholders, the law enforcement community, and legislators. I take these duties very seriously. Every session I attend is not only an opportunity to share information, but also for me and my company to learn. Sadly, sometimes these meetings are called due to tragic circumstances. I intend to give you a brief overview of our company's history, but more importantly, to help you understand the scientific and technical research and operation of our device. Let me start with the TASER electronic control device. What is it? It is a handheld device that emits an electrical charge through conducted wires a distance of out to 35 feet to temporarily incapacitate a subject that poses a threat so that they can be taken into custody safely. My brother and I started our company with the mission of protecting life. That remains our mission today. We have produced two products that are used extensively in law enforcement, the TASER M26 and the TASER X26. But let me give you a brief history of TASER technology. It's been around since the 1970s. It was introduced to the law enforcement market in 1974. However, the technology at the time didn't truly incapacitate. It was more of pain compliance. Through the 80s and 90s, it took some use here and there, but it had very limited application. The reason my brother and I started our company is we had two friends get shot and killed in a crazy road rage incident, and we looked at that and said, why isn't there a better way to stop somebody without having to resort to lethal force? We grew up watching Star Wars and Star Trek and said, why can't we make the non-lethal phaser? And that's what led us to start the company. At the same time, our mom was looking away for it to be able to protect herself and didn't like the options and wasn't comfortable with the firearm. So we decided to start TASER International and expand upon the history that had been out there for, at that time, 20 years. We introduced the first products in 1994 in the commercial market in the United States and really got into the law enforcement market in 1999 with the introduction of the M26. After that product was introduced and it had seen success and started some initial studies, we introduced the X26 in 2003 because it was 60% smaller, 60% lighter, and met the demands that the law enforcement community had. One of the things we also wanted to do was contribute to the accountability for the command staff to have over how use of force is applied. So every TASER that has been produced for the law enforcement community has an onboard clock and a computer system that records every time the trigger is pulled, so that if there are any accusations or allegations surrounding the use of the device, you can actually take the device from the officer, download the date, time, duration, battery temperature, and other information about how, when, and where it was used. We then went to the cartridge and serialized every single cartridge that in the case you issue it to a particular officer, you can not only validate where it was used because it leaves little ID tags all over the scene, but if it was assigned to an appropriate officer, if it was his cartridge that had been used. Again, another step in accountability. And then we introduced the TASER cam several years ago that now whatever you are pointing the TASER at, when it is activated, it records audio and video of the event to again give some accountability back to the command staff to make sure there's appropriate, responsible use within the training and policies of which it is established. There's no other device today that gives that kind of accountability for the use when it's used in a useful force situation. Let's talk a little bit about the electrical system of the TASER. When I sit here and I pump my fist open and closed, there's an electrical signal that's being transmitted from my brain to my muscle to make that occur. In its most basic form, that's what the TASER has copied, and we plug it into you remotely with two wires and send that same signal that cause the muscles to contract and release. That was where the success was, and when we do that 19 times per second, we can actually make those muscles contract and release to the point where you cannot override it. That's where we get the true incapacitation. Now, a lot of it has been made surrounding the number of 50,000 volts, and while that sounds very, very scary in relationship to 110 volts coming out of a wall outlet, you can actually get a static shock on a doorknob that's as high as 35 or 40,000 volts. So that just tells us the distance the energy will jump through an air gap. The actual application into the body is very, very low power. It's actually less than 4 milliamps. On the X26, it's about 2.1 milliamps. I think some people are surprised to learn that the energy source for the taser, the batteries that power it, are the same batteries that are in most digital cameras. So we are only able to take that fixed energy supply and make it go high voltage to arc through clothing, but very, very low amperage. And in fact, in terms of joules, which is another measurement of energy, the joules per pulse are 0.07 joules per pulse that come out of the X26. And to give you a context, a defibrillator that's used to stimulate the heart usually outputs between 150 and 400 joules per pulse, again compared to 0.07 joules coming out of the X26. Now let me reference the medical studies. I have these binders here before me today. This represents over 1,300 pages and over 120 scientific and medical studies that have been done surrounding the use of the device, with the majority of these being peer-reviewed, meaning they've been looked at by other scientists, as well as studies that have been done in the United Kingdom, the Canadian Police Research Centre, the Alfred Hospital in Australia, the United States Air Force, among a few. We've also gathered together some incredibly scientific and medically minded individuals that create our medical advisory board, like Dr. Hugh Calkins, who's the director of electrocardiophysiology at one of the leading heart institutes in the United States. So we have world-class experts helping us conduct the studies and the research so that we can answer those questions and so that we know and take corporate responsibility for knowing what we're going to introduce before it hits into the marketplace. While we've done the theoretical research surrounding the electricity of the device, we've done certainly the medical research surrounding it, and it continues to go on. We've done animal testing, which was a good base beginning. Recently, over the last several years, there's been over 15 published, peer-reviewed human studies looking at the analysis of how a taser actually works on a human subject. And while all of that needs to be done and is appropriately being done, we've also had over 1 million people exposed to the taser, over 600,000 law enforcement officers, and nearly 500,000 field uses in the world. We've had over 1 million people exposed to the energy, which again is an incredible number in terms of the use of force and how this device can work. We have over 12,000 agencies deploying taser technology. 300,000 officers in the world are carrying tasers on their hip today, and also in 45 countries. And the biggest reason that this has had a tremendous impact on law enforcement is the ability to reduce injuries not only to officers but to suspects, and that is documented in nearly every agency that's used it. We've seen injuries go down in Winnipeg, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Quebec. Everywhere they have implemented a taser, we've seen injury rates to officers and suspects decrease with overall use of force. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and we would welcome the opportunity, should it be needed, to come back at any time to help the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And as I said, we will begin with the official opposition. Mr. Desange, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Smith. This is not an easy issue. One of the things I've noticed with all of the coverage that Mr. Smith, you have received over the last number of years is that you claim, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that tasers don't kill. And we are told, and I have believed it to date, but I'm questioning my own belief, that tasers are a non-lethal alternative to the guns in the hands of the police. Are you suggesting to us at all, and if you are, I want you to admit that, are you suggesting to us that while 300 people have died in North America, 17 of them in Canada, subsequent to them being tasered, that tasers have not played any part whatsoever in their deaths?
Again, I would suggest that you have to look at the scientific research that has been done today. I've been tasered myself, and we rely on the scientific experts to look at the data. And in terms of the studies that have been done, we have not seen anything conclusively that has come back scientifically that has said a taser has killed. And in fact, in the cases that you just referenced, in the vast majority, when the certain emotion has been removed, and certainly these are tragic scenarios, our heart goes out to their family anytime that occurs, but when you have been able to look at the science, the taser has been removed in almost all the cases. There are less than 30 cases where the taser has been listed as a contributing factor, meaning it's listed along with other devices, but that is completely different than saying the taser caused a certain outcome.
Are you then suggesting to me that the 270 that have died, other than the 30 that you say may have been contributed to by tasers, that those 270 would have died regardless of whether or not a taser was used?
Well, sir, I'm responding to the medical
No,
community.
I'm asking you a question. Give me a question in layperson's answer in a layperson's language. Are you suggesting then that those 270 would have simply vanished even if taser had not been used?
I'm telling you the research that was done on those particular cases has shown that the taser did not cause nor contribute in those 270 cases.
And they would have died regardless.
Well, I'm not going to make that statement, but I'm going to tell you the research that has been done claimed the taser had nothing to do with the outcome of those tragic incidents.
Look, you say that taser is not risk-free. Obviously, you admit that there are risks. And so does the U.S. Department of Defense, which in 2004 actually concluded that it didn't want its military personnel to be tasered during training because they said because there are risks. So they know what you know, but you are not prepared to actually admit in simple layperson's language that those 270 persons may have been alive today if they had not been tasered.
Well, sir, with all due respect, there's no perfect solution that is out there. And I have to rely on the scientific community that in those 270 cases, when they examined the science, said the taser did not have to do with the outcome of those incidents. In regard to the U.S. military, there are certain risks. We do cause incapacitation where you can fall to the ground, and that can certainly result in an injury. But it's going to be much more similar to an athletic type of injury. And I would also point to the United States Department of Justice study that recently looked at 1,000 incidents and showed that there were roughly 2 or 3 that resulted in that exact type of an injury out of 1,000 incidents. It's a very, very low injury rate.
Look, let me preface my next question by simply saying I still believe that the police ought to have this non-lethal alternative, if it is non-lethal, and there are increasing questions with respect to that in my own mind, although I haven't come to a conclusion. But I was the Attorney General in British Columbia when, for the first time in Canada, the device was introduced with Victoria Police subsequent to a pilot project. I was assured that this is absolutely non-lethal and that it would be used sparingly by the police. And I have now come to believe that it's riskier than I was led to believe, and in fact it is not being used as sparingly as it ought to have been used. And the question that I have is the same question that someone asked you in Toronto, I believe. And this is not to cast aspersions on police officers, but this is a real question I think public need to know. The fact is, you admit that you pay police officers every now and then for certain things. I would like to know, how much have you paid in terms of actual money to police officers in Canada, and for what purposes do you pay them for? Because that's a huge issue of conflict. It's the same police officers that then come to us and say, we would like to be able to use this device.
And I was asked that question in Toronto, and at the time I did not have an answer, and I can give you the answer today. It's 2. One is Officer Darren Lauer, who was paid for the design of a holster that he created in the year 2000 So we paid him for the design of the holster that we used and then reproduced to sell. And then we have paid one other officer who did some training for us on his own time in Europe.
I understand you also said that you pay for training.
We pay officers when they take their own time for training in the United States. That is correct.
But not in Canada, not Canadians.
The two incidents I just gave you are the only two that my company has paid officers in Canada.
All right. Let me ask you another question, and that is a question that most of the studies that you say you've done on humans. Initially, you started out with the studies on pigs, and then had the authorization obtained to use this device with respect to humans, and then obviously subsequently you had this data with respect to humans. You say, I've looked at those studies, most of the studies exclusively focus on the age group between 19 to 43, and these are people that are aware they're going to be tasered. They are healthy people. And when you take those 2 or 3 factors out, when the police then go onto the street and taser an individual they know nothing about, could be older, could be younger, could be unhealthy, do you think that your research takes all of that into account?
I believe the research that we're doing today is the best available, and we are following the ethics standards that are set by our leading institutions worldwide, not just in the United States. And I believe we are looking at, and I can tell you in the classes where law enforcement officers do get trained, we don't deselect anyone. And in fact, we looked at recent studies where the members in the class had had a previous heart attack or a previous heart condition and have been exposed to that. We've also been subjecting them now to alcohol and drug and that type of application, which is also going to be seen on the street, and also exercising them to the point of them becoming acidosis, literally exhausting them before hitting them with the taser, and then scientifically measuring the blood. We're measuring the breathing, the pulse rates, using an ultrasonic waveform so that we can see how it's reacting. And that's being done independent of our company. That's been funded by the National Institute of Justice, the University of California at San Diego, Dr. Ted Chan. So I do believe the research that is out there today, while you'll never be able to look at every possible scenario that exists, certainly covers the vast majority of cases that exist within the human body.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We'll now go to Monsieur Menard. Please, do you have your translation set up there? Okay. Monsieur Menard?
One of the first remarks of my colleague to the right has reminded me that you have in front of you 2 former ministers of justice and 2 former police chiefs on this committee. This is likely because we're all experts in public security. So we are of the opinion that we will be able to take advantage of your experience. Mr. Palmer, I'm going to start with you. Who funds the organization that you represent, the Canadian Police Research Centre?
Government organization, and we receive all of our funding from the federal government.
Do you or the members of your organization receive any kind of benefits, such as travel expenses to conventions or equipment from different companies who manufacture this type of equipment?
Do not, we pay our own travel. Very careful not to accept funding from companies for things such as travel. Normally we will buy equipment that we are evaluating and testing. Sometimes it is customer or industry supplied. We have not received any equipment from Taser International or any funding from Taser International.
So when you purchase using the funds that are given to you by the government. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Bon. Avez-vous remarqué au cours de ces dernières années
Have you noticed in recent years any significant increase in the use of tasers by police organizations?
We, as an organization, do not track the quantity of use of force. So I can't give you an accurate response.
Ok. Je comprends que, en tout cas, dans les cas
I understand that, at least in the police forces that I've been responsible for, the use of tasers is constantly documented. Reports must be submitted every time they are used. Would you be capable of making up a compilation of taser use across Canada?
Requested to do that, certainly we could take the information from the police services, tabulate it, and provide such a report.
Maintenant, de,
Now, from my reading, I have seen that tasers can contribute to causing death, and often in such cases, and now I've always read in English, but they were talking about that death may have been caused by delirium excitement or excited delirium. Now, what are the symptoms of this condition?
It's excited delirium is a set of symptoms that can be severe agitation, sweating, violent behavior, and the inability to process signals and respond to commands and questions from a police officer or anyone else. We consider it as a medical emergency, and I think one of the greatest successes since our last report was the police community and the emergency medical services community starting to work together and treat this as an emergency, and we're starting to see lives saved.
croyez-vous actuellement
Do you believe that currently we should stipulate that tasers should not be used in cases of excited delirium?
Our report, and when we looked at it, we didn't make any stipulation based on the peer review one way or the other on excited delirium. It is seen as an effective tool in rapidly subduing somebody in that state. So we didn't comment against it.
Monsieur Smith,
Mr. Smith, does your company sell tasers to civilians?
Yes, we sell to civilians in the United States and have since 1994.
non. Ne croyez-vous pas que
Don't you believe that tasers should only be placed in the hands of people who have been properly trained, and that they should only be used as a last recourse just before the use of a firearm?
Remember, in the United States, our citizens are allowed to buy firearms, and the taser is completely illegal to be sold in Canada. So in the United States, we felt for somebody like my wife or my mother to be able to access a technology like this to protect herself when she didn't want to have a firearm, we made appropriate accountability of the technology so that we could make sure it was used properly. Again, for where the product is used in terms of use of force by law enforcement, that is set by the experts, the law enforcement community, relative to the other tools. This is one tool in the toolbox. There is no perfect solution, and they will establish when and where it is used. And as far as training, we do provide a DVD and manuals and material to train.
simplement vous êtes d'accord qui ne devrait être utilisé.
But do you agree that it should only be used by people who have been trained to use it?
Final question. Go ahead. You answer.
Again, you can, in the United States, obtain a firearm and not have any training. So in our context, we do provide visual material through a DVD, written material through a manual that comes with it to be trained, and do make the effort to try and train them. But like other devices available, there's nothing mandatory or required.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Priddy, do you would you like to go next?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Smith and Mr. Palmer, for being here today. I mean, I think that this session and this, if you will, review was brought about by the tragic death of Mr. Jakanski at Vancouver Airport, although there were many other factors that were attached to that as well. But I think it has galvanized people's concern about tasers across the country, which was already beginning to grow. And I often refer to it as taser creep, because I am seeing more and more use of it in situations that as at least as they're described, do not seem to me to be the next step below using a gun. I would be interested, Mr. Smith, if you could tell me, where do you do not place the taser, I don't believe, when you're selling it. You do not make a recommendation in where it should go in the continuum of force. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Where would you place it?
Well, again, I would tell you that 86% of the agencies that use our technology place it at the point of active resistance, when the physical threat or violence for somebody getting injured is going to occur, is where it is typically used.
Mr. Palmer, can you answer the same question, please?
Well, what we recommended, or what we agreed upon, was that it was an intermediate weapon, and therefore could fit where the police services saw appropriate. We don't set policy ourselves.
No, but you do make recommendations, so that across the country, a taser, which I was with Mr. Desange in the room at the time that the tasers were approved in British Columbia, and I think that most people understood tasers to be sort of a last resort before an officer would use a gun. You tell me it might be an intermediate weapon. Some other police force might tell me it's placed somewhere else on a continuum of force. As a citizen, I think people are concerned if people don't know that it's used in a consistent way in consistent situations and levels of force across this country. My next question then would be, Mr. Kennedy reported out in December with 10 recommendations about taser use. Could you please tell me, not with all of them, but with those recommendations, how many have been acted on? Yes, Mr. Palmer.
Again, I haven't been tracking the outcomes of Mr. Kennedy's report. We're busily working on our own report.
Okay. Well, I must admit that answer would cause me some concern that we've gone, that Mr. Kennedy has done this review, and that while you may not have to actually follow all the steps in it, that there's not some coordination going on between looking at the work that's already been done and the work that you're currently doing. So saying that it doesn't have an impact concerns me as well. You may be confronted by police officers and police chiefs or attorney generals at the table, but you also have a health minister and a former nurse at the table. So my concern is whether either Mr. Smith or Mr. Palmer both, whether you recommend positioning after the taser has been used, because I think we know that there's about 10% of people walk around with cardiac arrhythmia anyway that may never cause them any problem, but could under these circumstances. When people are positioned in a prone position, then you will have a buildup of acidosis, so people should be repositioned very quickly. What kind of medical support, because it seems fairly inconsistent to me, do you recommend from taser, and do you recommend from the research center? Mr. Smith first, please.
Again, we don't have a recommendation. Again, that's going to come back to the department and how they're going to dictate policy in terms of post-taser application, other than to get them into custody, and then if it's a medical, get them in with medical personnel or at that point their policy is going to determine what they do. In terms of acidosis, a lot of our studies today have looked at the fact that the taser in the published peer-reviewed studies does not make somebody more acidosis or more acidic during the application of the taser. And in fact, the early use of that can end that confrontation where they were continuing to exert and maybe become more acidic.
Yeah. Well, the research I've read says it also depends on the position that they're in, and we have seen people in prone positions with additional pressure placed on their back, which is, I think, not any medical personnel's recommendation about the position that someone should be placed into after. Mr. Palmer, would you like to comment on whether you make recommendations to police forces about what to do after tasering or before tasering in terms of notifying paramedics or EMS?
I guess what we're seeing is the best practices evolving is to get the subject away from the prone position as quickly as practical, and also of getting EMS onto the scene in areas where they are what we would consider the excited delirium syndrome situations, medical emergencies. Other than that, just monitoring. I just wanted to come back to your other question on Mr. Kennedy's report. As you're aware, there was a couple of recommendations in that report relating to the Canadian Police Research Centre, and
Correct.
we're actively involved in pursuing those. Okay,
my last question then, if I might, would be if you were to go across the country and talk to police forces. My city is probably the largest one, for almost 400,000, the city of Surrey, that's policed by RCMP, but many are policed obviously by their own police forces. Do you think you would find any consistent gathering of data about when tasers are used, what circumstances, the result on the person? Would you be confident that we would be able to tell the kind of use that it is seeing? Because what I have heard is that the information gathering is inconsistent. There is no guarantee that there will be documentation afterwards. And so even if we were to ask you, as Mr. Desange said, Mr. Desange or Mr. Menard, I'm not sure, could you gather that information? Do you have any confidence that information is even out there?
Use of force reporting is a provincial responsibility. My understanding is that most provinces now are requiring that police services provide reports when force is used. But
you don't have no idea whether it's in a consistent manner or not?
No, I do not.
Mr. Smith, do you get reports back about taser use and impacts?
The data that we try to collect is, for example, in Canada, is what we've been able to get out of the publicly available media. Most departments, as Mr. Palmer represented, keep that data, and they are reluctant to provide it, especially to a manufacturer. So most of the data that we receive is obtained publicly in Canada. In the United States, a lot of departments do submit that information, but again, it's certainly not a standard practice.
It concerns me that someone who makes a company that would make a weapon that, if not causation lethally, could be a predisposing cause, would not be able to receive back information about the impact of that weapon. How would you know how to change its use? Thank you.
We'll now go over to the government side, and I think Mr. Norlock and Mr. McKenzie, you have agreed to share your time. Mr. Norlock, you may go. Okay, if you don't use it up, Mr. Norlock will.
Thank you. Just a couple of follow-up questions as a result of some of the answers that some of the questions that were given and some of the answers also. This question is for Mr. Smith. There was some question as regard to the money that you've spent on police officers lobbying on your behalf versus, and my question would be, the amount of money that you may have spent on police officers either directly employed for a product purchased or developed by them to be sold, or the design to be sold to you, versus the amount of money that your company has spent on lawyers. How would you compare the two?
First, let me be clear. We have not paid any law enforcement officers to lobby nor to sell the product. They were paid for their time to train other officers in the use of force, similar to the standard that's set for all other use of force. I would tell you we spend a great deal more on legal fees in the last several years than we do on training fees.
Yeah, give us an idea how much you spend on legal fees.
We spend right now between $1 million US and $1.5 million US per quarter, so between $4 and $6 million US dollars per year on legal.
Thank you. I think you've answered, but I'm going to ask you directly. Do you pay police officers to lobby their civilian decision makers in order to purchase your product?
No, we do not.
Thank you. I have some questions for you, Mr. Palmer. Thank you. You mentioned in your with regard to Mr. Kennedy and some of his findings. Are you connected in any way with the RCMP?
We have RCMP representation on projects, but we are not part of the RCMP. No.
Thank you. We were, in some of your answers, excited delirium syndrome came up, and I've been doing some reading both in my previous occupation and currently with regard to excited delirium syndrome, and the question was asked to, I believe, the psychiatric community, and they say it's not a recognized psychiatric condition. However, they do say that there have been some studies into this so-called syndrome. Are you aware of that?
Yes, very much so. I guess the National Association of Medical Examiners recognizes it as a cause of death, excited delirium syndrome, whereas medical practitioners, psychiatrists, and others have yet to recognize it, and may not, because when they do a physical examination of somebody in a hospital, they have a whole range of other diagnoses that they can use.
In the absence of the use of the taser, let's say that it was recommended that the taser not be used when a police officer believed that they were dealing with a person who had excited delirium syndrome. What other form or method of constraint would you think would be appropriate to use to protect the innocent civilians around, or the police officer themselves?
Well, first and foremost, there's a variety for everything from conversation, and when that fails, when it's non-responsive, or the individual continues to be violent, either a hazard to himself or to others, then you have the options of pepper spray, which is a pain compliance device, and if the individual does not react to pain, then you go to others. You can try and break an arm or a leg with a baton. Very violent, damaging weapons. The other technique is also called the polyester pile, where you'll have 5 or 6 police officers jumping on an individual and bringing that individual to the ground, which often ends up in injuries to all concerned, the police officers and the subjects. So there's no easy solution to that question of what are the response techniques. It varies to what's available and on hand.
And these are assessments that a police officer or law enforcement agent would have to make within seconds of arriving, or at least in a very short period of time, and would depend on also whether or not the person exhibiting excited delirium actually had a weapon, or the potential of acquiring a weapon in regard to all the circumstances. And I'd like to go back to a couple of the methods, alternate methods of restraint. The last being, of course, the one we haven't talked about or you didn't mention. But the use of the metal baton, or the ASP, which most police officers are equipped with. Have there been any studies, to your knowledge, that reveal, when it is used, the numbers of injuries that would be sustained in its use? And what would those injuries be, from the least to the greatest?
I have seen some studies looking at that, and it is very rare that an ASP or a metal baton is used without the incidence of injury. And whereas with a taser, it's not as common to have an injury when it's used.
Now, the use, we haven't discussed the use of capsicum or pepper spray. Would you be aware of any circumstances where pepper spray would be used by police officers to little or no effect on the non-compliant person?
don't have any studies to that effect. I have anecdotal information from discussions with police officers where it has been ineffective, yes.
And would you also say that the use of pepper spray can also be a negative deterrent or a negative to the police in that when it's used in the exterior, in other words, in the out of doors, you have to, in those very few milliseconds or seconds that they have to determine what use of force methodology, that they also have to determine which way the wind is blowing.
Yes, there are situations where the victim of the pepper spray can be either the police officer or a fellow police officer.
And I guess I should say it could even be indoors where there's an air conditioner, a fan, or anything else.
Yes.
So the police officer in a very few seconds must determine whether or not they should use the ultimate, their sidearm, or the lethal weapon, or whether some alternate means of compliance can be used, everything from, as we mentioned, the ASP to capsicum. And would you not agree with me that if you're going to use the ASP, you have to be very close to the subject in order to be able to properly use that tool?
Yes, you have to be within physical striking distance of the individual.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Is up. I will have to end the first round of questioning, and we will now go to 5-minute rounds of questioning, beginning with Mr. Cullen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Smith. You know, many Canadians, this Canadian included, would have been working on the assumption that a taser would have been used as a weapon of last resort before lethal force. But when I saw those video clips of what happened with Mr. Jaganski at the Vancouver airport, I began to question that because, and I know there's a number of investigations going on, so you may not want to comment on that specific incident, but for trained RCMP officers not being able to restrain this gentleman without using a taser, I found quite shocking, frankly. But what I'm also hearing, though, from Mr. Palmer, law enforcement generally, and from Mr. Smith, is that it's really meant to be an intermediary sort of response, which I think puts a whole different perspective on it. And I'd like to come back to that because I'm a little confused about excited delirium syndrome. And Mr. Smith, on your website, Taser's website, you refer to a term called sudden in-custody death syndrome awareness. Is that the same thing as excited delirium syndrome?
I think they are different. Excited delirium syndrome is the symptoms of the individual. The sudden in-custody death scenario is an instance where, unfortunately, that has been around for years. It's the very tragic side of law enforcement. There's about 4,000 to 5,000 in-custody deaths that occur in law enforcement annually in the United States and Canada. So I think that's a different scenario. Not every one of those instances is excited delirium.
Okay, but on your website, if I have it correct, you say signs of sudden in-custody death syndrome include extreme agitation, bizarre behavior, inappropriate nudity, imperviousness to pain, paranoia, exhaustive exertion, superhuman strength, hallucinations, sweating profusely, etc. To me, that rings a lot like excited delirium syndrome, but I'd like to pursue this a bit because that is quite a different thing than someone being, as a last resort to use the taser before lethal force. And I'm just wondering if you could get to a point, if someone is in this excited state, which it seems to me that would be many circumstances when a law enforcement officer would present themselves in front of a person that's, about to be arrested, that they could exhibit these signs. It seems to me that could be quite common. Then the taser might put them over the top. In other words, they're in this agitated state, they suddenly get tasered, and that causes other physiological responses that may cause heart attack or something else. I wonder if you could comment on what I've just said. Either, both.
Is one of the things we looked at in our 2005 study was looking at the effects of acidosis, or the buildup of acids in the blood through exertion. and that led to our recommendation of no more than 3 5-second cycles on an individual, so that you did not have that extensive buildup of acids in the blood during the restraint process.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, again, we would take the perspective of nearly 500,000 people having been exposed in those same real-world situations by the law enforcement community, and it's going to be used in that similar level to the OC spray, to the baton, where there's going to be a physical confrontation between people. Always there's inherent risk there. That's typically where the taser, again, it's one tool in the toolbox, is being used in over 86% of the agencies that use our technology.
But it seems to me that if someone a confrontation is going to result, that sort of leads you to the thinking that it's sort of a weapon of last resort. But what I'm hearing from taser and from law enforcement is that if someone is in this agitated state of excited delirium, it's almost better to taser them because they could be heading towards a heart attack on their own. Better to taser them, get them calmed down, and get them to a hospital. Is it used in circumstances like that?
It has been used in circumstances like that, and some of the medical research is actually suggesting use the taser or any device to end that confrontation as quickly as you can, rather than allowing that person to continue down the path of physically exerting themselves literally to death. And so we have seen medical researchers recommend that the taser can stop that action, get that person into custody, and then, as Mr. Palmer recommended, get them to a medical facility or medical personnel to try and assist them.
See, I think that whether you agree with that or not, it seems to me that it opens up this huge gray area, though, of how do you interpret whether a person is exhibiting all this behavior. I mean, if you look at, sweating, bizarre behavior, exhaustive exertion, that's a pretty broad range, and I'm just worried about law enforcement officers, not with any devious intent or anything, but just sort of applying that so broadly that it takes, loses its meaning.
Well, and I agree, and one of the things that I think is key, again, to our tool or any tool is a good comprehensive policy on how any use of force, taser included, is going to be employed by the officers, and then good training so they understand the policy, they understand what the different tools can do, because they do have to make split-second decisions on how are they going to deal with this subject. Typically, it's a very minority number of cases that they have to use force in dealing with the everyday public, but it's a good policy and good training regiment that is set up to establish how the force is going to be used.
Okay, I think that's it for me.
That's right, yes. It's not a 7-minute round, it's only a 5-minute round. Sorry about that. Monsieur Menard.
Je vais partager mon temps avec Monsieur Menard.
I will be splitting my time with Mr. Menard, actually. I'm going to begin with 2 questions. We were speaking about training with regard to the use. And is the training given sufficient? Because we know that the use of the taser, there are people who are at risk, such as elder people or women who are pregnant. We have discussed today concerning the excited delirium syndrome. So what is your opinion on people who have taken drugs?
Well, and again, we go back to the medical research. One of the leading studies that has been completed was done by the Cleveland Clinic, which is the #1 heart institute in the United States, where we were provided funds to ask that very question, and they put animals on cocaine, exposed them to the taser to evaluate whether there was a higher degree of risk with those subjects being on a drug and exposed to the taser versus not. And the conclusion of that, which was a peer-reviewed study, showed that in fact it did not increase the risk of exposure being on cocaine and following the use of a taser. In fact, it made it much harder to stimulate them with electricity. Therefore, it was determined safer by the Cleveland Clinic.
Mais vous avez testé ça seulement sur des animaux ou avez-vous?
But you only tested that on animals, or did you actually do that same drug test on humans?
The only test we've been able to do on humans is with alcohol. We cannot get the ethical review board to take an illegal drug and apply it to a human subject for the testing. So we're bound by the ethics of the medical community on what they can do in terms of studies.
Puis les décès associés.
And deaths that are related to the use of tasers, are they related to any one model in particular, for example, the M26 as opposed to the X26?
No. It's not. We've had in-custody deaths occur with following the use of both devices.
OK, merci.
Thank you. Do I have a few minutes? I will ask for your agreement if you don't mind.
Je vois que vous avez...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that you have a great many studies with you. I would like to know, in those studies, among those studies, in what percentage did you participate in with regard to funding?
We participated in, and in the studies, when you look at our research, we actually highlight this was a study that was funded by Taser International. I would estimate today it's about 20% of the research. The 80%, for example, the Canadian research, the United Kingdom research, the Australian research, the U.S. Air Force research was all done independent of our organization.
Je voudrais savoir maintenant, êtes-vous d'accord?
Now I would like to know, do you agree with the following principle? The taser should not only be used in circumstances where a firearm could be used and in the place of a firearm. First, I would like Mr. Smith to answer.
Again, I'm going to rely on the use of force experts that tell us that it is not used. You do not take a taser to a gunfight, and that's where 86% of the agencies that are using our technology have it at the level of active resistance or the physical confrontation between people.
C'est pas tout à fait la question que j'avais posée.
That, excuse me, was not actually my question. Do you think that it should only be used in circumstances where the use of a fatal or lethal weapon can be used?
And again, I would say that the research that we've seen from the use of force experts show that that is not the only circumstance it should be used. It's going to be used at the same levels as a pepper spray or a baton, which is before a lethal situation with a firearm.
Quelle est votre opinion, M. Palmer, et avez-vous des nuances?
What is your opinion, Mr. Palmer, and do you have anything to add?
Well, I've seen research where someone who is being exposed to a taser has still been able to fire their firearm. So it would put the public and the police officer at risk.
Je crois, Monsieur le Président, que...
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if that was properly interpreted. What I want to know is that I have often heard this principle among policemen who say that tasers should only be used in circumstances where policemen would normally use firearms where they don't have tasers. Now, do you agree with that? And if not, could you tell us why or add something?
Anybody want to give a brief response?
Well, I'll go back to the. It would be dangerous. It would be dangerous because an individual can still be able to fire their weapon with the taser. So as a full use of force option other than a firearm, could be dangerous.
Okay, Mr. McKenzie. Yeah, Monsieur
The
Bernard.
principle that it should be used only
turn.
instead of an arm, and only in circumstances where the firearm should be used.
We don't, sir. We don't write policy. What we did is we said that you have lethal weapons and you have less lethal. When we did our evaluation, we said this is a less lethal technology and therefore fit into the spectrum of the intermediate weapon, not as a lethal force weapon.
Okay, so I think that's clear enough. Monsieur McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Actually, I would suggest that the question is backwards. If the officers don't have a taser, it may result in them using a firearm. So it gives them one more tool, and that simply makes sense to me. we've talked a lot about excited delirium deaths. Excited delirium deaths, that whole issue came up before the taser was used. And my recollection back in the perhaps early 90s when we were using oleoresin capsicum spray or pepper spray as commonly known, we had excited delirium deaths then. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are. The first terminology came up, I believe, in 1988, where it was, and the research literature goes back to the 1800s of identifying deaths of a similar cause.
And that's not something that a police officer who is in the middle of a scuffle or a struggle or whatever situation is going to be able to say, well, that individual is suffering from excited delirium.
As you probably all know, police officers generally have a basic, first aid training. They're not trained medical professionals, so a detailed medical diagnostic is not something they'd be able to perform.
I think one of the areas that we sort of got off on is the excited delirium, and to me it's a little bit of a red herring in this issue. I think that we need to hear from you folks about the research and what it is. But if we looked at most of the issues that seem to have developed here today, would I be correct in saying that most of those issues deal with training and discipline? And discipline, as with respect to the training, is that the discipline that follows the training. When we talk about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and all of those things all deal with training. And just one little thing I'd like to say about when you were talking about the use of force, Mr. Palmer, I think you said about the 4 or 5 officers piling on. There's a lot of police officers in this country who'd be happy to have 3 or 4 other officers with them. So, that option is not necessarily viable in a lot of cases. So, but the use of the taser in Canada is primarily handled by officers that are specifically trained in the use of taser and the use of force, parts of ordinarily containment teams or tactical teams or supervisors, as opposed to everybody on the street. Would you have that knowledge, or could you comment on it?
Again, sir, it varies from province to province, but in most provinces it is sort of at the supervisor special team level that has that. I think just to add to your question, if I may, I think that when the police community asks us to look at something, they say, what we want from you is to understand what the medical issues are, how does this work, and are there areas that it doesn't work. They take that information and then they build their policies, and from their policies they build their training, and then the next step is the reporting and the feedback to ensure the quality of service for their communities.
Okay. If I could just go back to the excited delirium, and my recollection is that going way back, we had incidents of people who were handcuffed in police cars that were dying. And at the time, we weren't sure why, but I think after the fact, we medical people started to talk about this phenomenon called excited delirium. They weren't necessarily people that had had any particular use of force used with them. I just wonder if either of you could comment if you're aware, or if you could confirm, in fact, that has been the case in the past.
It's difficult to comment on anecdotal information that isn't well documented. But I will say that I have received phone calls from police officers that said, Steve, I read your report, and thank you, because I had an incident last night, and I saw we got the individual, we got them in the hospital, and they're alive. And as you also know, that probably had, there was 2 less victims. One is the subject themselves, and then the police officer with an in-custody death investigation hang over his head.
Okay. Thank you.
I can tell you just again anecdotally that police and the law enforcement community have been dealing with the subject of in-custody death since the 1800s, since policing started. So I think the new thing now is trying to understand medically how can we minimize those incidents from occurring, and I think that's where a lot of the research is going today. How do we recognize that? How do we train a law enforcement officer who's not a doctor to recognize a scenario that's going on, that they need to get somebody medical attention? And I think that's where a lot of the research is going today, is whether a taser is there or not, that incident, has been around for many, many years, and unfortunately it's not going to go away. But we also have a law enforcement officer who has to implement our laws, has to take people into custody that may choose to fight with them. I've said this before, there's a way not to get tasered or any use of force is don't fight with police. So I think if you start to look at the medical body and the medical research that's being done today, and a lot of the policies, the feedback loop that's in place to implement better procedures and training so that we can get these people help, I think we're going to see a decrease. But unfortunately, I think that's the side of policing that you just aren't going to be able to eliminate.
Okay, briefly, very briefly.
The other thing, and I know it's impossible to prove the negative, but one of the advantages of a taser is, and it's kind of the opposite of Mr. Menard's statement, but we would have no way of knowing, I suppose, how many people may not have had the use of lethal force because the officer had the option of using a taser, and that would be the intent of the taser?
Absolutely, and we are, we in the United States at the National Institute of Justice, they're struggling with that question. How do you confirm that this avoided that particular outcome, because it ends the confrontation so that the officer isn't getting hurt, the suspect isn't getting hurt. As Mr. Palmer mentioned, I have traveled the world and heard from law enforcement officers, thank you for this technology because I didn't have to get hurt, and I was able to take this person into custody without incident. And again, that's why this tool is available. It's not perfect. None of them are. It's a very difficult situation. It's giving them another tool in the toolbox.
Palmer, you had a comment?
Yes, I would just like to say that's one of the intents of our restraint study. We're doing a prospective study, which means we're going to be looking at different cities for the course of a year and looking at all cases where there is, an assaultive behavior on an or greater with a police officer. We'll look at the medical records, we'll look at the outcomes, and in a year we'll be able to answer that question factually.
Okay, we'll begin the next round now. Ms. Barnes, please.
Much, sir. Thank you for coming today. What is the weight of a person that could be safely tasered? I mean, we come in all shapes and sizes, and what do you consider a safe weight for your taser to work without harming?
Well, again, in the medical research that we've done, the smallest that I've seen so far has been in the 60-pound range to upwards of several 300 pounds. And I think one of the advantages to this technology is it's not like a drug where it's dose dependent based on the size or weight of the individual. The signal that exists within the body exists whether you're small or large, and that we're just causing a stimulation to occur. So again, in the research, we've seen between the 60-pound range and several 300-pound range.
60-pound would be children's weights. You're not suggesting this should be used on a child?
Well, again, what we're relying on is the scientific evidence of what we've looked at per se. Obviously, there's certain scenarios in the policy and training where you don't want to have to use force, but what are the options that are available? And so we have to rely on the research.
Okay, Mr. Palmer, is there any concerns about the different weight issues? Are there any directions about who a taser can be used on, or any restrictions in this country right now?
Again, we didn't set any policy, any real policy restrictions. Those are provincial jurisdictions.
Okay. In the material, you say that the taser is being used in correctional facilities. That's not in Canada, to my knowledge. Can you concur in that?
Palmer or Mr. Smith?
Mr. Smith. It's in his materials.
I believe it's being used in correctional facilities in Canada. Some, not all.
Thank you. I want to, this is a very cold country in some parts. Right now, -40. Has any studies, any medical work been done about the effects of tasers in a very cold setting? Would there be differences?
We've done studies of the weapon itself functioning, and that's one of the reasons we use compressed nitrogen so that we can have them function in the cold. The batteries are going to really be the limitation of the manufacturer of the power supplies. In terms of the medical studies, our direction was more, there had been concern that applying a taser application, and Ms. Priddy had mentioned the acidosis, was more related to increasing body temperature, which we did not see in the research that it was published. But we haven't tasered anybody that's been put into a cold environment in terms of the research that I'm aware of.
Well, a lot of Canada's cold in winter and people are being tasered. So, Mr. Palmer, is there any studies done about the effects of various temperatures when using this weapon?
I don't, I'm not aware of any. There may be some, but I'm not aware of any. We've, studies I've seen have looked at the mechanical, electrical characteristics of the device in cold weather.
Multiple tasering is permissible from my reading of the RCMP materials right now. Why is it necessary to have more than one taser incidence? Why is that necessary?
Each individual use of force is something that needs to be considered by the police officer at the scene and evaluated as what is required to obtain compliance of the individual. So each case would be unique, and certainly the officer would have to identify why, explain why.
Mr. Smith, you manufacture a product that actually can continue with a taser force for significant lengths of time. Why did you not produce a taser that automatically cuts off, so there's no chance of an accidental continuous taser?
Well, there's twofold to that. Number one, when we've done the science in a lot of our human studies now, we're going as long as 45 and 60-second continuous exposure so that we make sure medically we can show that there's no higher degree of risk in those cases. On the practical application side, in working with the law enforcement community, we did not want to limit again, it goes back to what Mr. Palmer said. We don't limit a guy to hitting somebody with a baton twice or spraying with a pepper spray once or shooting a single bullet. So we're giving them a tool that they will, again, through policy and training, have to know how to implement and apply. And until we see medical research that says there's that certain risk, we made the device work for a 5-second cycle. At that time, the officer will evaluate, are they going to have to use another application of the taser.
Mr. Palmer, are there any studies being done that you're aware of in Canada about the differences of impact by a multiple taser use as opposed to a single taser use?
There have been a variety of studies that have looked at the impacts, the physiological characteristics of multiple uses, yes.
Could you provide these to the clerk of the committee so we can have them distributed, please?
Yes, I can. There is. Oh, I can provide you with the references anyway. Sure.
I have just a question on the technical aspects before we go over to the government side, and it stems from this. It's minus 40 outside. Are there things that restrict your ability to use it, such as a lot of heavy clothing or this kind of thing? Is there something that the person could do to protect themselves from being tasered?
There are, and we cover that very extensively in training. And again, it goes back to the 50,000 volts, and I mentioned at the beginning, that allows the energy to arc through up to 2 inches of clothing. Oh. And we fire out 2 darts. So if you think of it as jumper cables, it's a positive and a negative. If you only have one of those darts make a contact, or one of them is further than 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the body, it's not going to be able to arc the distance and connect to send the signal into the body. In fact, in the studies we're seeing today, the #1 reason for the taser not working in the field is a missed shot, meaning only one dart hit, or they were wearing a very, very thick coat that, for example, if it swung away more than that distance, it's not going to make the connection and send the energy into the body, and then the officer would have to resort to another tactic with the taser or another tool.
Okay, good. Mr. Mays, you are next on the list.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Smith, why do your designers feel it is necessary to have the X26 waveform repeat at 19 cycles per second, given that a waveform is more than perfectly capable of locking up the victim with each cycle. Why not repeat the shock perhaps 2 or 3 times per second? What is the reason for that?
And that's a great question, and actually that was one of the reasons the original technology did not work that well. When we actually went into the lab to determine what was the level we needed for incapacitation, the discharge of our pulse is really in the range of microseconds. The actual pulse lasts for about a microsecond, and when you look at that, again, that release causes a single muscle contraction. What we learned in the lab, and what we actually even learned in our human testing early on, is that if we were anything less than about 12 to 14 pulses per second, the individual was able to have enough recovery time of their muscle that they were able to, while being jerked around, they were still able to function. But once we crossed that threshold, we got the true incapacitation where the muscle would lock up to the point where they were not able to continue to incapacitate. So we came with the 19 pulses per second based on that was what was required in order to get incapacitation to the point, you know, if we went much up beyond that, we didn't see any further lockup. That was kind of the optimal point where we got the lockup of the individual. They couldn't fight through it, but going beyond that, there was no further benefit.
Okay, so that's the minimum, is what you're saying.
That was the minimum's 12 to 14, and that's kind of on the edge. So at 19 was on a bell curve. That's where we saw the maximum incapacitating effect of locking up the muscle response, where it would not be able to recover to the point of the individual being able to fight through the effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Now we come over to Ms. Brown for the final round of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Palmer, your study that your center did, was it restricted to a review of the literature, or did you actually have human subjects and test them with taser application?
In the 2005 study, we did not do any human or animal testing ourselves. We reviewed literature.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, you list 12 studies in your presentation, one of which is this one. How many of those 12 studies involved testing on humans?
Well, again, in this, there's over 15 studies.
No, I'm talking about your presentation. There's a list of 12, so I have to assume you think those are the best 12 or the most convincing 12.
Well, actually, they're more just a representative sample of some of the international flavor, but I would tell you that the Wake Forest University study at the bottom was a human study on 1,000 taser applications in the real field use. Dr. William Bozeman presented that. The study above that at the University of California at San Diego, Dr. Ted Chan, and he's performed 3 or 4 different studies. They looked at breathing, they looked at the acidosis question.
I just really want the number. Of the 12, how many had human participants?
I would tell you 1, 2, 3, 4. At least 4 of them.
Okay, 4. Mr. Palmer, you said your center, which is the Research Center for Canada, does not track the use of force in Canada. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Supposing we asked you to do that, do you think the police forces across the country would share that information with you? For example, supposing we asked you to compare the number of times a firearm was discharged by a policeman as compared to the number of times a taser was used. Supposing we challenged you with that and gave you the money to do it, do you think the police forces would disclose to you those kinds of statistics? Or don't they?
Well, they're certainly tracking those statistics.
They are, but I'm saying would they share them so we could get a national picture?
Quite honestly, I believe they would.
Okay, thank you. For example, Mr. Smith says in his presentation that he is aware Winnipeg shared with him the fact that their municipal police force tasered 160 times in 2006. Did they also share with you how many times a gun was discharged by the Winnipeg police?
We collected that data from the newspaper, so the only thing it referenced in the newspaper was that particular sighting.
Okay. Do we have any figures for 2007 which compares those two things?
I have not seen anything yet. Again, our source, as I referenced before, was from what has been published in the media, and I think at the time most of this was published at the end of last year was still referencing 2006.
Thank you. It seems to me that the research is showing that there are some places on the chest which seem to absorb the more damaging effects than, say, being tasered on the thigh or the shoulder or something. I'm wondering if you would be willing in your future training exhibits and public demonstrations to include the barbs on the chest in the exact locations determined to be least safe by the scientists.
Actually, in the human studies that we've done, we've tried to replicate the animal models where those concerns were raised, and we have not been able to do that. In fact, just last week, Dr. Mark Kroll, who's on our board of directors, holds 200 patents in pacemaker technology, was shot with the probe in the center of the sternum in a demonstration. So what we try to simulate in the training is really what they're going to see in the real world, and to reach those more susceptible locations is going to be very, very challenging, but we have seen that duplicated in the human studies that have been published without being able to achieve the same result.
You suggested to us you have been tasered.
Yes.
And your mother and your wife have purchased tasers, or
yes.
You've given them to them. Would you be willing to subject yourself to taser testing on those very sensitive parts of the chest?
Yes, I would.
How about your wife and your mother?
I can't speak for them, but I can tell you that we have a lot of people that would subject themselves to that testing.
I didn't mention your mother-in-law, you'll notice.
Thank you.
Now, you have in your literature this business about 60 pounds. How do you know that for sure?
I'm sorry?
You have in your literature that a 60-pound person could absorb a taser shock and still be safe. How do you know that? Did you expose that to children?
No, what was done on that was when the original study that was published and peer-reviewed in PACE, which is the Journal for Electrocardiophysicological I can't remember the exact title, but its acronym is PACE, P-A-C-E. They did an initial test where they looked at 60 pounds through 240 pounds and established kind of a baseline safety margin. And in our material, that's what we're referencing, which is the 60-pound animal that was done in that test.
This is an animal.
Yeah, we have not been
a person.
Correct, because we've not been able to get the ethics committees again.
I understand, and I don't want you to either.
Right.
But I'm wondering why in your promotional literature you would talk about 60 pounds. Does that not encourage people to think it might be applicable to children? Why ever would you put that in, even though it's a scientific fact? Why wouldn't you have thought, this could be misinterpreted?
Well, again, the policy and procedure is going to dictate the training. What we had to represent was the science that was done, and that just happened to be the weight of the smallest animal that was used in that particular study. Again, it showed a minimum of 15-to-1 safety margin.
And are you clear that it's animal, that a 60-pound animal could absorb such a shock?
That was in that particular test, correct.
But is that in your promotional material, that it's a 60-pound animal, or is the implication that it's a 60-pound human?
The implication is that it was a test done by PACE on the animals, and that the smallest subject, again, that's the base model that they use when they're doing cardiac study for pacemakers, defibrillators, and even the tasers, that was the baseline model that was used, was that size, 60 pounds.
Over to Mr. Brown now for the next round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for coming today. I know in light of these high-profile deaths in Canada over the last while, there's a great deal of public interest, and Canadians are keen to see exactly the outcome of our study as well as the other studies in Canada. And we're just getting into this now. I haven't had a chance to review some of the outcomes of obviously, you've had studies in the United States. Maybe you could just give us a general, Mr. Smith, give us an idea of what we will find in those studies when we do a little bit more research.
Well, again, there's over 120 studies that have been done to date, and basically what we're seeing at this point in time is they're generally safe, very effective tools. We haven't seen the scenario where they can repeatably say, if you have scenario A, B, and C occur, you're going to have this outcome. I can tell you here in Canada, in 16 of those incidents where it did go to 6 jurors that was peer-reviewed through the process of an inquest, the taser was not even mentioned as having contributed or been a causal in any of those cases. Now, there's still some new ones pending with the more recent incidents, and we have to rely on the medical researchers to be able to document that, and that's it's certainly an emotional event that we are sympathetic to, but we have to rely on the science, and that's what this information here is providing.
What I'm trying to get at is studies similar to this about the use and the policies and procedures. In some of those other studies, what kind of recommendations will we find?
Well, we haven't seen any recommendations in the medical studies other than
No,
to
I'm
say...
not talking about the medical studies. I'm talking about studies similar to what we're doing. There must have been some other ones done in the United States when, obviously, there has been some deaths.
Like, for example, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is kind of thought leaders from all over the world, came out with here, if you're going to put a TASER program in place, here's the steps you should take in developing a policy, developing good training. Mr. Palmer mentioned, which is a new subject now also, recognizing some medical aspects that maybe instead of just a law enforcement call, it's also a medical call. So those are things that are evolving, and recommendations that you'll see is to make sure there's a policy, make sure there's training, and at least some beginning recognition now of some basic medical conditions that may require medical attention.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Mr. Palmer this question. In terms of studies that may have been done, have we seen any decrease in injuries to law enforcement when they do have those, I don't know how you would measure it, but you may have some studies or some information on how it may make it safer for our law enforcement officers?
That's one of the areas that we're going to be looking at in our study as well. Again, there's a few older studies out there and a couple of newer ones that do address this by not necessarily broadly, but by individual police services.
Okay. Well, go back to Mr. Smith for a second here. I noticed that you're developing another TASER. It's launched from a standard 12-gauge shotgun and will have a range of 20 meters, and you're expecting to have that this year. What sort of use do you see for that, different than right now with the more handheld unit? Well,
one of the limitations today in the use of our device is the length of the wires. We're just physically limited by that distance. And I mentioned earlier those Star Trek phaser, a longer range application. In law enforcement use today, one of the things that they have is a beanbag round or a rubber bullet that can be deployed from a launcher such as the shotgun. So one of the requests we had from the law enforcement and military in particular was they would like to be able to reach, let's say, a person in a barricade situation or a person further than a confrontation with you and I. The TASER is obviously proven effective in stopping and incapacitating compared to a beanbag where you're literally just trying to hit somebody with a fastball and inflict pain that sometimes they may be able to fight through if they aren't feeling that. Where this device will be able to take that type of an application, it's a higher level of force, hit that individual, and now apply a TASER wave to incapacitate them rather than just hitting them with beanbag rounds.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now go back to the government side. Mr. Cullen, please.
Thank you. We're now government. I love it. I love it.
The opposite side. Why, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to come back, if I could, to this sudden in-custody death syndrome awareness. Now, on your website, Mr. Smith, it says that if a subject is exhibiting signs of behaviors that are associated with sudden in-custody death syndrome, and you then list that these signs are extreme agitation, bizarre behavior, inappropriate nudity, imperviousness to pain, paranoia, exhaustive exertion, superhuman strength, etc., hallucinations. Consider combining use of a TASER device with immediate physical restraint techniques and medical assistance. Now, when I saw the videotape of the Mr. Jaganski experience, and it comes back to this issue about, using the TASER once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, and I don't recall how many times they used it, but it seems to me it was certainly more than once and maybe more like 3 or 4 times. What in the way that you look at it, if someone is exhibiting these symptoms, so then let's say, could you use 1 shot of a TASER, and then if you have 4 RCMP officers especially, not then rush in and subdue this person, or do you have to actually TASER them, multiply? I don't understand how that works.
Well, in the Vancouver case, there's 9 minimum investigations I'm aware of going on, so I don't want to speculate on that particular instance. But what I can tell you is in the research that we're seeing today, Sometimes more than one application is required to give the officers the ability to take that individual into custody. I think people need to understand one of the fallacies about the taser device. It does not knock you out. It does not make you go unconscious. It only incapacitates during the stimulation. As soon as that stimulation ends, there's nothing keeping that individual from getting up, from re-engaging in the fight, from getting their full faculties back. And if they weren't able to restrain them or get them into custody and they choose to continue to fight, there have been times where the second, third, or fourth application is needed in order to get that person restrained.
But then wouldn't you say then if you're recommending on your website that if they're exhibiting these behaviors, which it seems to me that Mr. Jaganski's case, and I know you don't want to comment on that specifically, but that's what the state that he seemed to be in, to me anyway, that you'd use a taser and then try to use physical force rather than using the taser repeatedly. I mean, I suppose you have the dilemma that one of the police officers will get in between the taser and the person you're trying to subdue, but what you're recommending on your website is not that you absolutely, multiple taser the person to the point where they're totally incapacitated and then you apply physical force or, constraints. You're saying to do them simultaneously. Is that right?
That's the standard trend out there with any use of force. You don't want to have somebody just sit there and hit them with a baton over and over again either. You want the idea of using force by law enforcement is to take that person into custody with the least amount of force possible to reduce the injuries. So certainly we cover in our training pretty extensively that we don't want somebody to just sit there and keep pulling the trigger over and over. This is not a spectator sport. To get in, get them restrained, get them into custody, so you minimize the amount of force. But there's, again, with policy and training, that's where they're going to determine how that's done at the particular agency.
I know there was a piece on I don't know what program on television, where there's this woman who was quite drunk, and the police officers, they tasered her, mercilessly, and she was lying on the ground, and they even tasered her when she was in the police car. Now, I think, to me, that's an abuse of the taser, and probably it's maybe 1% or less, or half of 1% of law enforcement officers that would use that, and I think this person was disciplined. But how do you then deal with the fact that if you're tasering someone and you try to apply physical force at the same time, that the police officers don't get in the middle of it and get tasered themselves?
Well, and that's part of the reason in the training we recommend that the officers get tasered, is that while that person's getting tasered, the other officers are hands-on and touching the officers so that they can realize the electricity is very lazy. It's trying to only go between those 2 points, and that as long as they're touching the extremities or away from that area, it's not going to go to them. But if they do touch that point of contact and become part of, let's say, the circuit here, they will get that stimulation. So we do really emphasize in the training that you can go hands-on. The taser, unless you touch the probe or get in between the probes, is not going to come to you. And that's really part of the purpose, A, that they experience what the taser feels like so they know the amount of force they're applying, but B, when they're holding this subject up, that it's not going to come to them just because they're touching the individual.
One final question, if I may. It's a very short one. What is do you know, Mr. Smith, the temperature of the electric arc of a taser? The temperature?
I do not know the temperature off the top of my head.
Could you let us know through the chair?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Monsieur Menard, do you have any further questions, or
yes, just a few.
Do the block?
Well,
Mr. Smith said earlier that since tasers have been used, he mentioned in a number of cities, Canadian cities, there was a reduction in injuries. I suppose that you, Mr. Palmer, are very interested in the various statistics in police forces in Canada. Can you confirm the impression that Mr. Smith gave?
We don't have those. We do not have those statistics which identify what the injury rate was prior to the use of tasers and what it currently is. It is one of the areas that we are seeking information on to see whether we can capture that information in time for our report in August.
cela me demande Vous demandez, Monsieur Smith.
Mr. Smith, you have often referred to cases that occurred, and you give the impression that you have noticed a decrease or an increase in certain statistics. But what are you basing yourself on? For example, that there were only X number of cases when the taser was used. Where do you get your figures from? Where are the statistics compiled?
In a lot of the instances, the departments at the department level did track injury rates before. Obviously, they've had injuries in the past versus the implementation of when a taser came in. For example, in the United Kingdom, they were documenting injury rates to officers, and then when a taser was being deployed, there were no injury rates at those particular instances where a taser had been deployed to an officer. However, if an officer had used a baton or gotten into a fist fight, there had been an injury by the officer having to go to the hospital. And a lot of that data is really in worker compensation claims made by the officer and it's held by the cities. But a lot of that data really comes out of the agencies reporting back to us. Unfortunately, anywhere in the world, there's no central reporting of injury rates to officers or suspects. So a lot of that data is used by the local municipalities, and I included a PowerPoint presentation that gets some of that data for your reference. That is taken from public records at the cities and the departments that report those statistics, and it's by far and away not comprehensive for every agency.
Mr. Palmer, here in Canada, we have a uniform statement on crime rates, and therefore we have very, very accurate statistics on crimes that are reported to police. So I don't think that it would be asking much more of our system to add that when a taser is used, this be noted. This could be added, for example, this box to be filled out on a police report, don't you think?
That's the information that is probably already captured by police services, and again, I'm not sure whose jurisdiction it falls into, whether it's federal or provincial, from tracking statistics. But it's certainly not the Police Research Centre's position or responsibility to demand that information from police services.
And in fact, I believe the statistics are compiled by Statistics Canada. But you know which uniform statement I'm referring to, the uniform report. That could be one of the recommendations we make. Now, there are rare incidents where police are obliged to use 2 tasers. Once again, Mr. Smith, you have literature on that. Do you have it broken down as to whether 1 taser shot is enough with regard to 2 taser shots? The fact that the person is hit, for example, by 2 tasers, does that increase the risk factor by quite a bit?
We have not seen an increase in the risk factor with multiple exposures to the taser, and the way it was relayed to me is if I have 2 cups that each have 100 degrees of water and I pour them together, I don't have 200 degrees of water. I have more of 100 degrees of water, and electricity, again, follows very similar principles to water. It's not a cumulative effect that each time you add it, you're going to be accumulating it in the body.
Okay, we'll actually have to wrap it up. Ms. Pretty, did you have any more questions? You did. Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
Please, thank you. They're training questions, if I might. If a city in Canada decide, say, I don't know, a couple 100,000 people decides to buy tasers, and maybe they're going to buy 50. I don't know. Who from you? Who provides the training?
Typically, it's law enforcement officers that will provide the training. We do what we call a train the trainer program.
Yeah.
Where they will attend a taser training. It's a 2-day course to become an instructor, where they will learn how the taser works, and then they will take that material to go back and develop a use of force policy and a procedure. Our 2 days really focuses on the taser itself.
In many train-the-trainer programs, and I'm not suggesting around tasers, but other train-the-trainer programs, there is follow-up to document or evaluate how well the training has worked, have people been able to work with it, have there been any problems with it, et cetera. Do you do that?
We absolutely do. We, in fact, just released version 14 of our own training. So over the last several years, Mr. Palmer mentioned earlier, the feedback loop is a key factor for any training. So we take that very seriously also, and will continually update to provide the latest material to send out, and we've done 14 different versions.
The reason I'm worried about that is because there is at least one case I'm aware of where I think it's actually a police officer who is brought a lawsuit, but the comment, I believe by taser, but I am not certain, but the comment was made when he was being voluntarily tasered and injured his back, that the officers who were tasering him were not holding him correctly, and therefore I do worry about, you know, how training can get diluted, if you will, if there is not very extremely consistent follow-up with it. And so in that circumstance, I wanted to know about the train-the-trainer. The other part I'm interested in, just it seems an irony that the tasers that are bought by individuals in the United States, are they the same?
There are, the electrical pulse that they deliver is the same.
Right.
We
Okay.
limit the distance to 15 feet, where for some law enforcement it's 35 feet.
And they get a DVD. I just the irony of if I buy a new bread maker or lawnmower, I get a booklet and a DVD, and if I buy a taser, I get a booklet and a DVD for how to use it. There just seems to be some inconsistency in training. However, we're not talking about selling them here. Do you think, Mr. Palmer, that the training that is going on across the country is consistent? I mean, Canadians have a right to know that they are safe and equipment is being used safely no matter where they live in this country. Do you think the training is consistent? I mean, I'm concerned that you can only make recommendations. You can't collect data from people in Canada primarily. We're told that the only provinces can make recommendations, although is that the case with the RCMP? That we can only make recommendations? You could only make recommendations to the RCMP?
I have no legislative, as an organization, no legislative authority.
Okay.
No.
So we have 3 or 4 organizations all involved in something that citizens are very concerned about, and yet both the responsibility and the coordination seems to be spread amongst a number of organizations, provincially, federally, municipally, the manufacturer, the training, et cetera, and it doesn't seem to me there's much coordination in being able to have somebody who insists that across the country, this is the training, this is the protocol, you call an ambulance paramedic before you use it. Like, these are the things we guarantee citizens when tasers are used, and I must admit that's really concerning to me. Thank you.
Do you have a comment, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I do, because you know, you're bringing that up in the context of just a taser. I would say we are following the industry standard. What is being done for pepper spray? What is being done for the baton? What is being done for physical restraint? What is being done for firearms? The standard that's out there that we're following in the train the trainer and the way that the officers are being trained is consistent with the way they're trained in use of force in general. And I would just say that you are going to probably want to look at all of that, because this is just, again, one piece of the puzzle in the whole training application for law enforcement.
Of course, one can always be better and therefore set a higher standard for other implements that
we think we have the best training out there
that other
today.
people are training with.
Okay. We'll now really go over to the government side. Mr. McKenzie.
Mr. Chair, actually, Mr. Smith, I appreciate what you just said, because I thought that we'd gotten way off base. All we're talking about is the taser. The people who supply the ASP we don't check off boxes when our police officers use an ASP. We don't check off boxes when they use what monadnock sticks. We don't check off boxes when they use a number of other use of force options. So, and with all due respect to what Ms. Pretty said, is that the provinces are responsible for the administration of justice, and not only the RCMP are in provinces across the country. There are also municipal forces in those provinces. So the provinces, I think, as Mr. Desange said, they set their rules across the country. So the province of Quebec, the province of Ontario, province of British Columbia, they all may have a different reporting document, if you will, for the use of force. And Mr. Palmer, I would just ask you if it would not be virtually impossible to try and gather the information that the committee is asking, because there may very well be different interpretations across the country by the provincial authorities in what's required to report the use of force, and taser is only one small part.
You know, it's yes, you're right. It would take a consistent agreement negotiated at the Solicitor General level, I suspect, between all provinces, and to get the information and establish the reporting systems, etc., to bring it all in a consistent basis. And whether you would do that just for tasers, or whether you wanted, which again are they're used, but it's not the principal tool of police. It's used in a small, very, very small percentage at the time.
That's good enough. Thank you.
Okay, we will now go over to the official opposition. Ms. Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Research is a word where I think it has different meanings to different people. When I think of peer-reviewed research, I'm thinking of, doctorates doing some studies and having it verified by other people of that level. You use the word Canadian Police Research Centre. Is there peer-reviewed research done in the Canadian Police Research Centre, say, within the last 5 years?
Yes, I would say that the work that we did on the taser last time, because we used a committee that came up and did peer review research that included scientists, medical practitioners, and others. So we didn't. In that case, it wasn't published in an established journal. We had our own peer review committee look at the work. We've also had some of our people publish in peer review journals.
Okay, my understanding from your answer to Ms. Brown earlier was that that was a literature review.
Yes.
That's not peer-reviewed research.
Well, the review, and the comments that we made and the recommendations that we made in the report went through a review committee of scientists and researchers. So they did have that independent oversight, peer review, if you wish to call it.
Okay, peer review has a specific meaning in research communities.
Yes.
I think we're not talking the same thing. I'm just going to ask Mr. Smith. I noticed that you've got different countries here, often in the Commonwealth, the Australia, the UK home branch. Did any of these countries, before using your product, do their own physical research on people? Like Canada has not done that. Did any of these countries do it?
Yes, they did. The Home Office actually spent 2 years and £3 million, and they did the same type of protocols and are now collecting the field data as well. When they went out to the initial use in 2003, I believe it was, they only limited it to 5 agencies. It was very controlled. I believe it was over 18 months where they were very controlled in the use. In France, where they're using, they have this in use by the police and the gendarmerie. They did do human testing prior to allowing the law enforcement, following the protocols that had actually been done in both Canada and the United Kingdom. There is a lot of sharing of knowledge between the countries, the institutes of justice, between Europe and North America, and in Australia, the Alfred Hospital had done the same type of research. So it's not just research that's been done in the U.S. There has been human research done outside the U.S. as well.
And that has not been contributed to in any way, shape, or form by your company?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you so much on that. You know, I think of this is a public safety committee, and I think of other ways our federal government is involved in the health of Canadians. For example, drug research. A new product comes in the market. We don't take the U.S.'s studies. We do our own studies. And I'm just going to be very interested to go through this process because I don't think most of us are experts in tasers, and there is a real concern in this country over their use. And I see, you know, even from clippings earlier today, we see that some of the studies on pigs, for instance, in the U.S., there's a problem. Do you want to address that study? Because it certainly brought up some problems.
It did, and that's why when that study raised those concerns, the human studies went to find out, did we have the same effect that they saw in those particular studies that were done several years ago? Because obviously the human study that's the model where we're using it, and we have not been able to, we did not reproduce it, and the studies that were done independent of us by the University of California at San Diego were unable to reproduce the results. And I think one of the committee needs to understand the reason you start with the swine model in the animal study is they're much more susceptible to electrical stimulus than the human being is. So that if you're proving it at a certain level there, it's certainly applicable to the human, but if you find something there, we then go to the human model. We've not been able to reproduce the effect.
And my last question, you know, when you're talking with an animal, they have a limited brain capacity, but you're talking to, say, a 100-pound person. Is there any studies done on the psychological effects of having been tasered?
I'm not aware of any psychological studies that have been done. I know we've worked with the mental illness associations, both in Canada as well as the United States. In fact, we were endorsed by the National Schizophrenic Group within British Columbia several years ago as being a good tool to have available to police. Again, another tool in the toolbox, but no peer-reviewed published studies that I'm aware of. I don't know if
Mr. Palmer?
On psychological effect.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing there are none, I would like to thank our witnesses very much for your attendance at the committee today, and appreciate all the information you've given to us. We will find it very helpful as we go forward. Yeah, you're very welcome. This meeting stands adjourned.